The moment the Navy chaplain's voice echoed through the small chapel, asking everyone to stand for Admiral Hayes, I watched my family's stunned faces transform from smug indifference to absolute shock. They had refused to attend my wedding, dismissing me as the family failure who threw away a promising future. But in that single moment, they realized the truth. I hadn't thrown anything away. I had built something they never saw coming. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. My name is Sarah Mitchell, and I grew up in the suffocating embrace of a military dynasty that stretched back 4 generations. The Mitchell family wasn't just connected to the armed forces. We were the armed forces. At least, that's how my grandfather, Brigadier General Robert Mitchell, saw it when he looked at our family tree hanging proudly in his study. Every branch of that tree bore the weight of stars, eagles, and oak leaves. My great-grandfather had commanded artillery units in World War II. My grandfather had led troops through Vietnam. My father, Colonel James Mitchell, had served with distinction in the Gulf War, before transitioning to a high-profile position at the Pentagon. Even my uncle had made it to lieutenant colonel before a training accident ended his career early. The expectation wasn't just that I would serve, it was that I would excel, climb the ranks, and add another layer of glory to the Mitchell legacy. From the time I could walk, family conversations revolved around military strategy, leadership principles, and the sacred duty of service. Sunday dinners weren't just meals, they were briefings on honor, courage, and commitment. My older brother, Captain Michael Mitchell, had followed the prescribed path with mathematical precision. West Point graduate, commissioned as an officer in the Army, fast-tracked through various leadership positions, and currently stationed at Fort Bragg where he was being groomed for his own eventual star. When he came home on leave, my father's chest would swell with pride as he introduced him to neighbors and colleagues. "This is my son, Captain Mitchell," he would say, the words rolling off his tongue like a prayer. The emphasis was always on the rank, never just the name. Then there was me. I had shown promise early on. Top of my class in high school, accepted to multiple prestigious universities, physically fit and mentally sharp. My father had already started making calls to his contacts, ensuring my path to a military academy would be smooth. The plan was simple: Naval Academy, commission as an officer, climb the ranks, continue the family tradition. But during my senior year of high school, something shifted. Maybe it was the guest speaker who came to talk about alternative paths to service. Or maybe it was the growing realization that I was living someone else's dream. When I announced that I wanted to enlist in the Navy instead of attending the academy, the reaction was swift and brutal. "Enlist?" My father's voice cracked like a whip across the dinner table. "Mitchell women don't enlist, Sarah. We lead." My mother, Patricia, tried to mediate with her usual diplomatic approach. "Sweetheart, perhaps you just need more time to think about this. The academy is such a wonderful opportunity." But I had thought about it. For months, I had wrestled with the weight of expectation versus the pull of something I couldn't quite name. The Naval Academy felt like a golden cage, prestigious, respected, but ultimately confining. I wanted to serve, genuinely serve from the ground up. I wanted to earn my place through merit and hard work, not family connections and legacy admissions. "I want to be a Navy SEAL," I said quietly, the words hanging in the air like smoke from a fired weapon. The silence that followed was deafening. My grandfather actually dropped his fork, the metallic clatter against his plate, the only sound in the room. Michael looked at me like I had just announced my intention to join the circus. "That's ridiculous," my father finally managed. "Women can't be SEALs." "They're changing the requirements," I replied, meeting his gaze steadily. "The barriers are coming down. I want to be part of that change." What followed was weeks of arguments, lectures, and interventions from various family members. My grandfather pulled me aside multiple times, explaining the importance of leadership, the responsibility of our family name, the opportunities I was throwing away. My mother tried the gentle approach, suggesting I could always serve as an officer first and explore special operations later. But I had made up my mind, and nothing they said could change it. The day I shipped out to boot camp, only my mother came to see me off. My father was unavailable due to Pentagon obligations, and Michael was on assignment. My grandfather didn't even return my goodbye call. Boot camp was everything I expected and more. The physical demands were brutal, the mental challenges constant, and the emotional toll significant. But for the first time in my life, I felt like I was exactly where I belonged. I wasn't Sarah Mitchell, daughter of Colonel Mitchell, granddaughter of Brigadier General Mitchell. I was Recruit Mitchell, earning my place one push-up, one obstacle, one challenge at a time. I excelled in ways that surprised even me. My scores in marksmanship were exceptional, my leadership qualities emerged naturally, and my determination was unshakable. When I graduated, I was selected for advanced training, the first step toward my ultimate goal. The family's response to my success was lukewarm at best. When I called home to share news of my achievements, conversations were brief and polite. When Michael received his promotion to major, the celebration lasted for days. When I completed my advanced training with honors, I received a card in the mail with my mother's signature and a brief "congratulations" in her careful handwriting. The distance between us grew with each milestone I achieved. When I was selected for SEAL training, one of the first women ever chosen, I thought surely this would impress them. Instead, my father's response was a terse email. "I hope you know what you're getting yourself into." SEAL training broke me down and built me back up in ways I never imagined possible. The physical demands were beyond anything I had experienced, but the mental challenges were even more intense. Day after day, instructors pushed us beyond our limits, weeding out those who couldn't handle the pressure. I watched strong, capable candidates ring the bell and walk away. I watched men who had seemed invincible crumble under the relentless demands. But I stayed. Through hypothermia-inducing ocean swims, through sleep deprivation that made reality blur at the edges, through obstacles that seemed designed to be impossible, I stayed. When I finally earned my trident, the symbol of a Navy SEAL, I was one of only 3 women in the program's history to do so. It should have been the proudest moment of my life, and in many ways it was. But as I stood there with my fellow graduates, I realized that the people whose approval I had craved my entire life weren't there to witness it. My first deployment was to Afghanistan, where I served on a team conducting high-risk operations behind enemy lines. The work was dangerous, demanding, and vital. We rescued hostages, gathered intelligence, and disrupted enemy operations. Every mission mattered. Every decision could mean the difference between life and death. I found my calling in those mountains and valleys, working alongside some of the most dedicated and skilled operators in the world. My teammates didn't care about my family name or my gender. They cared about whether I could do the job. And I could. Over the course of multiple deployments, I proved myself again and again. I saved lives, completed impossible missions, and earned the respect of everyone I served with. My service record was exemplary, my leadership skills undeniable, and my dedication absolute. But back home, the silence from my family continued. They had written me off as the daughter who had chosen the wrong path, who had rejected the family legacy in favor of something they didn't understand or respect. What they didn't know was that while they were focused on traditional markers of success, academy graduations, officer commissions, Pentagon positions, I was building something entirely different. Something that would eventually make their achievements seem small by comparison. During my final deployment, something happened that would change everything. But that story begins with a woman named Lieutenant Commander Jessica Torres, a brilliant naval intelligence officer who saw potential in me that even I didn't fully recognize. The path that led to my wedding day, to that moment when the chaplain asked everyone to stand for Admiral Hayes, began with a conversation in a dusty forward operating base half a world away from the family that had given up on me. Lieutenant Commander Jessica Torres changed my life with a single question asked over lukewarm coffee in a makeshift briefing room somewhere in Kandahar province. We had just completed a particularly challenging extraction mission, and while the rest of my team was decompressing, she pulled me aside. "Have you ever considered intelligence work, Mitchell?" The question caught me off guard. SEAL operations were my world. direct action, precision strikes, boots-on-the-ground missions that required split-second decisions and unwavering execution. Intelligence seemed like a completely different universe, one filled with analysts hunched over computers rather than operators rappelling from helicopters. "I'm not really the desk job type, ma'am," I replied, assuming she was talking about traditional intelligence analysis. Torres laughed, a sound that seemed out of place in our austere surroundings. "Who said anything about a desk? I'm talking about field intelligence operations. Covert work that requires someone with your skill set. Someone who can blend operational expertise with strategic thinking." She went on to explain a classified program that was just getting off the ground, one that combined special operations capabilities with deep intelligence gathering. It was the kind of work that happened in the shadows, where success was measured not in headlines but in threats neutralized before they could materialize. "The program is selective," she continued. "We're looking for operators who can think beyond the immediate tactical situation, who can see the bigger strategic picture. Your psychological evaluations suggest you have that capability." I was intrigued, despite myself. The mission she described sounded like everything I loved about SEAL operations, but with an added layer of complexity that appealed to the part of my mind that craved intellectual challenges. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. What would it involve? Additional training first. Advanced language studies, cultural immersion, psychological operations, cyber warfare basics. Then deployment to situations where you'd be gathering intelligence while maintaining your cover as a special operations asset. The training she described would take place at various classified facilities across the United States. It would mean months away from my unit, learning skills that most SEALs never needed to develop. But something about the challenge excited me. "There's one more thing," Torres added, her expression growing serious. "This program reports directly to Naval Special Warfare Command, but it operates with a high degree of autonomy. Success in this field can lead to opportunities that don't follow traditional military career paths." I agreed to the transfer, though I couldn't fully explain why. Maybe it was the intellectual challenge, or maybe it was the chance to prove myself in an entirely new arena. My teammates were supportive but puzzled. I was leaving elite special operations for something none of us fully understood. The next 18 months were unlike anything I had experienced in my military career. The training began at a nondescript facility in Virginia, where I learned to speak Arabic and Farsi with native fluency. I studied cultural nuances that could mean the difference between successful infiltration and blown cover. I mastered advanced surveillance techniques and learned to operate sophisticated electronic equipment that could intercept communications from miles away. But the most valuable skills I developed were psychological. I learned to read people in ways that went far beyond basic behavioral analysis. I could detect deception, identify recruitment opportunities, and manipulate situations to achieve strategic objectives. It was chess played with human pieces, and I discovered I had a natural talent for it. My first field assignment took me to Eastern Europe, where I spent 6 months as part of a joint operation monitoring arms trafficking networks. On paper, I was attached to a NATO training mission. In reality, I was gathering intelligence on weapons flows that could potentially reach terrorist organizations. The work was exhilarating and terrifying in equal measure. Unlike SEAL operations, where success was often measured in minutes or hours, intelligence work played out over weeks and months. I had to maintain my cover while carefully building relationships with targets, gathering information piece by piece until a complete picture emerged. My handler during this operation was Commander Patricia Wong, a brilliant woman who had risen through the ranks by consistently delivering results that others thought impossible. She became both mentor and advocate, pushing me to develop skills I didn't know I possessed. "Intelligence work is about seeing connections that others miss," she explained during one of our encrypted communications. "You have the operational background to understand the tactical implications of what you're seeing, but you also have the analytical mind to put those pieces together strategically." The Eastern European operation was a complete success. The intelligence I gathered led to the disruption of 3 major arms trafficking networks and prevented several potential terrorist attacks. More importantly, it established my reputation within the intelligence community as someone who could deliver results in high-stakes situations. My next assignment was even more challenging. I was deployed to the Middle East as part of a deep cover operation that would last nearly 2 years. My official position was as a liaison officer, working with Allied forces on counter-terrorism operations. My actual mission was to penetrate and map the financial networks that funded extremist organizations across the region. This assignment required me to become someone entirely different. I adopted a new identity, complete with fabricated personal history and carefully constructed relationships. I had to convince dangerous people that I was sympathetic to their cause while secretly documenting their activities. The psychological toll was enormous. Living a lie for months at a time, always aware that a single mistake could result in torture and death, required a kind of mental discipline that even SEAL training hadn't fully prepared me for. But I thrived in the environment, developing sources and gathering intelligence that proved crucial to operations across multiple theaters. During this deployment, I began to understand something that my family had never grasped about my chosen path. While they saw military service in terms of traditional hierarchies and visible achievements, I was operating in a world where the most important victories were invisible to everyone except a small group of senior leaders who understood their strategic value. The financial networks I mapped led to the closure of funding streams worth hundreds of millions of dollars. The sources I developed provided advance warning of planned attacks that saved countless lives. But these successes would never appear in newspapers or result in public ceremonies. They existed only in classified reports, and the quiet satisfaction of knowing that real differences had been made. Between deployments, I continued my education through advanced military schools and civilian institutions. I earned a master's degree in international relations through a program designed for intelligence professionals, studying under professors who had advised presidents and shaped foreign policy for decades. My thesis focused on the intersection of special operations and intelligence gathering in modern warfare, drawing on my unique experience in both fields. The work caught the attention of senior leaders at the Pentagon, though I was unaware of this at the time. Commander Wong continued to be my advocate and mentor throughout this period. She helped me understand that my unconventional background, the combination of special operations expertise and intelligence capabilities, made me valuable in ways that traditional career paths couldn't achieve. "You're building something unique," she told me during one of our rare face-to-face meetings. "The military is evolving, and leaders who can bridge different domains are going to be essential for future operations." Meanwhile, my relationship with my family continued to deteriorate. The classified nature of my work meant I couldn't explain what I was doing or why it mattered. To them, I had simply disappeared into some anonymous military role that didn't merit their attention or respect. When Michael was promoted to lieutenant colonel, the family celebration was elaborate and well documented on social media. When I received commendations for operations I couldn't discuss, nobody knew except the small group of people who mattered most in my professional world. The isolation was sometimes overwhelming, but it was also liberating. I was free to pursue excellence on my own terms, without the weight of family expectations or the need to conform to their vision of what military success should look like. It was during my third major deployment that I met Captain David Chen, a Navy pilot whose intelligence and integrity impressed me from our first conversation. But that meeting, and everything that followed, would set in motion events that would eventually lead to the most important day of my life, and the moment when my family would finally understand what I had built in the shadows of their disapproval. Captain David Chen wasn't supposed to be at the briefing that changed everything. As a Navy pilot, he should have been preparing for routine patrol missions over the Persian Gulf. Instead, a last-minute personnel shuffle had placed him in a secured conference room in Bahrain, listening to classified intelligence briefings that were far above his clearance level. I noticed him immediately. Not because he was handsome, though he was, but because he was asking the right questions. While other officers focused on tactical details, David was thinking strategically about the broader implications of our intelligence findings. "If we disrupt their supply chain here," he said, pointing to a location on the digital map, "won't they just shift operations to the secondary routes we identified last month?" It was exactly the kind of forward-thinking analysis that separated competent officers from exceptional ones. After the briefing, I approached him. "You're not supposed to be here, are you?" I asked with a slight smile. David grinned sheepishly. "Last-minute replacement for Commander Bradley." I'm probably way out of my depth with this intelligence stuff. "I don't think so. Your questions showed better strategic thinking than half the people in that room." We talked for another hour, supposedly about operational details, but really getting to know each other. David came from a Navy family, but unlike mine, his parents had supported his choice to pursue aviation rather than follow his father's path in submarine warfare. "They figured I should follow my passion," he explained. "My dad always said the Navy needed good people in every role, not just the ones that matched family tradition." The contrast with my own experience was stark, but I found his family's approach refreshing rather than painful. Here was someone who understood military service but hadn't been crushed by the weight of generational expectations. Our professional relationship began with occasional consultations. David's aviation expertise proved valuable for planning operations that required air support, while my intelligence background helped him understand the broader context of his missions. These working relationships gradually evolved into something more personal. David had a way of seeing through the walls I had built around myself. While others accepted my professional persona at face value, he seemed to understand that there were depths I rarely revealed. He would ask questions that weren't quite personal, but weren't entirely professional either, gradually drawing me out of my shell. "You don't talk about your family much," he observed one evening as we reviewed flight plans for an upcoming operation. "Not much to discuss," I replied, keeping my tone neutral. "That's not the same thing as not having anything to discuss," he said gently. It was the kind of insight that made me realize David was more perceptive than I had initially recognized. Over the following weeks, I found myself sharing details about my background that I rarely discussed with anyone. The turning point came during a particularly dangerous operation that required close coordination between air assets and ground intelligence gathering. I was inserted into a hostile area to gather time-sensitive information, while David provided overwatch and emergency extraction capabilities. The mission went sideways when my cover was compromised, and I found myself pinned down by hostile forces with no clear escape route. David's voice came through my earpiece, calm and steady despite the chaos. "Sarah, I need you to move to the rooftop. I can't get a clear shot at your position, but I can provide cover fire if you can get elevated." The building I was trapped in was 3 stories tall, and reaching the roof meant exposing myself to enemy fire. But David's tone conveyed absolute confidence in his ability to protect me during the movement. "On my mark," he said. 3, 2, 1, move." I sprinted for the stairwell as the distinctive sound of his aircraft's guns erupted overhead. His precision was surgical, close enough to suppress the enemy forces but never close enough to endanger me. By the time I reached the rooftop, a rescue helicopter was already approaching for extraction. Later, during the debrief, David's commanding officer praised the operation as a textbook example of air-ground coordination. But what struck me wasn't the professional success. It was the absolute trust we had developed in each other's capabilities. "Thank you," I told him afterward. "For what?" "Just doing my job. For trusting me to do mine." That mission marked the beginning of something deeper between us. We started spending time together outside of work, exploring the local culture during our limited free time. David introduced me to photography, a hobby he had pursued since college, while I shared my love of languages and cultural analysis. Our conversations ranged from philosophy to military strategy to dreams for the future. David wanted to transition from operational flying to test pilot work, eventually hoping to contribute to the development of next-generation aircraft. I found myself sharing ambitions I had never voiced to anyone, thoughts about how intelligence work could evolve to meet emerging global threats. "You think differently than most people I know," David told me one evening as we watched the sunset from a quiet spot near the base. "You see connections and possibilities that others miss." "Is that good or bad?" I asked. "It's remarkable. You're building something with your career, even if you can't see it yet." The relationship deepened over the following months, but it also became more complicated. The classified nature of my work meant there were aspects of my life I couldn't share, even with someone I was falling in love with. David understood this intellectually, but I could see the frustration in his eyes when conversations hit classified boundaries. The real test came when I received orders for another extended deployment, this time to a location I couldn't disclose for an operation I couldn't describe. David would be returning to the United States for his next assignment, meaning we would be separated by continents and security classifications. "How long?" he asked when I told him about the assignment. "I don't know, could be 6 months, could be longer." "And you can't tell me where you're going." "You know I can't." David was quiet for a long moment, and I prepared myself for the conversation that would end our relationship. Most people, even military people, couldn't handle the uncertainties that came with loving someone in my line of work. "Then I'll wait," he said simply. "David, you don't understand what you're signing up for. This isn't like regular deployments where you can count down days and communicate regularly. Sometimes I disappear completely." "I know exactly what I'm signing up for," he replied. "I'm signing up for you." My deployment lasted 14 months and took me to 3 different countries under 2 different identities. I was building networks, gathering intelligence, and occasionally participating in operations that would never appear in any official records. The work was vital and dangerous, requiring total focus and commitment. Communication with David was sporadic and heavily monitored. Sometimes weeks would pass without any contact, then I would have an opportunity to send a brief, carefully worded message but couldn't reveal anything about my location or activities. But David kept his promise. His messages, when they could reach me, were filled with news about his own career developments, observations about places he had traveled, and gentle reminders that someone was waiting for my return. During the longest communication blackout, nearly 3 months when my deep cover operation couldn't risk any outside contact, I wondered if I was being fair to him. The life I had chosen required sacrifices that extended beyond my own comfort and safety. It demanded sacrifices from anyone who chose to love me. When I finally returned to the United States, David was waiting at the airport despite having no advance notice of my arrival. He looked older, more serious, but his smile when he saw me was exactly as I remembered. "How did you know?" I asked as he held me. "Commander Wong might have mentioned that you were stateside," he said with a grin. That evening, over dinner at a quiet restaurant off base, David told me about the promotion he had received and his new assignment to the Navy's test pilot program. It was everything he had hoped for professionally, the next step toward his ultimate goals. "There's something else," he said as we walked along the beach afterward. "Something I've been thinking about for the past 14 months. He stopped walking and turned to face me, pulling a small box from his pocket. "I know your work comes first, and I know there will be more deployments and more secrets I can't know about, but I also know that I want to face whatever comes next." The proposal was simple, heartfelt, and perfectly suited to who we were. No grand gestures or public displays, just 2 people who understood the realities of military life, choosing to build something together despite the challenges. I said yes without hesitation, but even as we celebrated our engagement, I knew that the biggest challenge was still ahead of us. Eventually, I would have to tell my family about David, and eventually they would have to confront the reality of who I had become during the years they had written me off as a disappointment. The phone call that would change everything came at 0347 hours on a Tuesday morning in March. I was deep in sleep at David's apartment in San Diego when my secure phone buzzed with an encrypted message from Admiral Reynolds, Director of Naval Intelligence. "Mitchell, I need you in Washington by 1400 today. This is Priority Alpha." No explanation, no context, just orders that couldn't be questioned or delayed. David stirred as I quietly gathered my gear, accustomed to these sudden departures even though he could never know their purpose. "How long this time?" he asked sleepily. "Unknown. Could be a few days, could be longer." He squeezed my hand. "Be careful, whatever it is." The flight to Washington gave me time to speculate about what could require such urgency. Priority Alpha classifications were reserved for matters of national security at the highest levels. In my 6 years of intelligence work, I had only received 2 such summons, both leading to operations that remained classified even within the intelligence community. Admiral Reynolds met me personally at Andrews Air Force Base, her presence confirming that whatever was happening was significant beyond my initial estimates. Catherine Reynolds was a legend in Navy circles, the first woman to hold the Director of Naval Intelligence position, with a reputation for brilliant strategic thinking and absolute integrity. "Sarah," she said as I approached her vehicle, "thank you for coming so quickly. We have a situation that requires your unique skill set." The drive to the Pentagon was conducted in complete silence, my security clearance not yet sufficient for discussion of whatever crisis had prompted my summons. It wasn't until we were seated in a SCIF, a sensitive compartmented information facility deep within the Pentagon, that Admiral Reynolds began to explain. 3 weeks ago, we discovered a security breach that compromised multiple ongoing intelligence operations across the Middle East and Eastern Europe. Someone with high-level access has been selling classified information to hostile foreign actors. The implications were staggering. If ongoing operations were compromised, assets in the field could be in immediate danger. Sources I had developed over years of work might be exposed and killed. "The breach appears to originate from within the Navy's intelligence structure," Reynolds continued. "We believe the perpetrator is someone with extensive knowledge of current operations and access to compartmented information. Ma'am, how can I help?" Reynolds pulled out a thick folder, marked with classification levels I had never seen before. "We're forming a special investigation unit with authority to operate across all service branches and intelligence agencies. The unit will report directly to the Secretary of Defense and will have unprecedented access to classified materials and personnel." She paused, studying my reaction carefully. "I'm offering you command of this unit, with immediate promotion to commander and authority to handpick your team." The offer was so unexpected, so far beyond anything I had imagined possible, that I struggled to process its implications. Command positions at this level typically required decades of traditional career progression through visible leadership roles. I was being offered something that should have been impossible for someone with my background. "Ma'am, I'm honored, but I don't understand why you would choose me for this role." "Because you have something that traditional naval officers don't. Operational experience in the field combined with analytical capabilities that have been proven under fire. You understand both the technical and human elements of intelligence work, and you've demonstrated the ability to operate independently under extreme pressure." Reynolds opened the folder and spread several documents across the table. "These are your operational reports from the past 3 years. Every mission successful, every objective achieved, often under circumstances that would have defeated more conventional approaches." I scanned the documents, seeing my career summarized in cold clinical language that somehow failed to capture the reality of those experiences. Late nights in hostile territory, carefully cultivated relationships with dangerous people, split-second decisions that affected global security. It all looked different when reduced to official reports. "There's something else," Reynolds said. "This investigation will likely uncover connections to organized crime networks and international terrorism financing. Your experience mapping financial networks in the Middle East makes you uniquely qualified to understand these connections." The scope of what she was describing began to crystallize. This wasn't just about catching a spy. It was about dismantling an entire network of corruption that threatened national security at multiple levels. "If you accept this position, you'll be working directly with the FBI, CIA, and international partners. You'll have access to intelligence databases and operational resources that most officers never see. But you'll also be making enemies among some very powerful people." I thought about David, about the life we were planning together, about the wedding we had tentatively scheduled for the following year. This assignment would mean more secrecy, more danger, and probably more extended separations. "What's the timeline?" 6 months minimum, possibly longer depending on what we uncover. The investigation is compartmented at the highest levels. Even your existence as unit commander will be classified. There was really only one answer I could give. This was why I had joined the Navy, why I had endured years of family disappointment and professional isolation. Someone was betraying the people I had served with, endangering assets I had recruited, and threatening operations that protected American lives. I accept. Admiral Reynolds smiled for the first time since my arrival. "I thought you might. Congratulations, Commander Mitchell." The next 4 weeks were a whirlwind of briefings, clearance upgrades, and team assembly. I selected a small group of specialists from different branches: a Marine Corps intelligence analyst who specialized in financial crimes, an Air Force cyber warfare expert, a Coast Guard investigator with experience in international smuggling networks, and a civilian contractor who was arguably the best data analyst in the intelligence community. Our investigation began with a comprehensive review of all security breaches over the past 2 years, looking for patterns that might indicate systematic compromise rather than isolated incidents. What we found was disturbing: a sophisticated network that had been operating for at least 3 years, carefully extracting information in ways that initially appeared to be random security failures. The financial analysis revealed something even more troubling. Money wasn't just flowing from American secrets to foreign accounts. It was being laundered through legitimate businesses and charitable organizations before reaching its final destinations. We were looking at a conspiracy that involved dozens of people across multiple countries. As we dug deeper, a picture began to emerge of the primary target: a Navy captain named Richard Steinberg, who had held key positions in intelligence oversight for the past decade. His access to compartmented information was virtually unlimited, and his financial records showed deposits that couldn't be explained by his military salary. But Steinberg was smart. He had built an elaborate system of cutouts and false identities that made direct proof of his involvement nearly impossible to establish. Traditional investigative approaches would have taken years to penetrate his operational security. That's when I decided to use an approach that combined my operational background with the investigation unit's resources. Instead of trying to prove Steinberg's guilt through financial records and communication intercepts, we would conduct a deception operation that would force him to reveal himself. Working with my team, I developed a sophisticated plan that involved creating false intelligence about a fictional operation, then carefully monitoring who had access to that information and tracking where it appeared in foreign intelligence networks. If Steinberg was our target, he would inevitably compromise the fictional operation, providing us with proof of his betrayal. The operation required approval at the highest levels of government, since it involved deliberately spreading false information through official intelligence channels. Admiral Reynolds presented our proposal to the Secretary of Defense, who authorized the operation after consulting with the President's national security team. 3 months after beginning our investigation, the trap was set. We fed false intelligence about a supposed covert operation in Syria through carefully selected channels, ensuring that Steinberg had access to the information while limiting exposure to other potential suspects. Within 72 hours, foreign intelligence services were taking actions that could only be explained by their knowledge of our fictional operation. But more importantly, we had traced the information leak directly to Steinberg through a sophisticated pattern of communication intercepts and financial transfers. The arrest was conducted quietly, without media attention or public acknowledgement. Steinberg was taken into custody on a military base, charged under the Uniform Code of Military Justice with espionage and treason. The evidence we had gathered was overwhelming: financial records, communication intercepts, and testimony from foreign assets who had been turned in by other intelligence agencies. But as we prepared for Steinberg's prosecution, Admiral Reynolds called me into her office for another conversation that would change everything. "Sarah, there's something you need to know about this investigation. Something that goes beyond Captain Steinberg." She pulled out another classified folder, this one marked with security classifications that were new to me. "The network we've uncovered has connections to organized crime families and terrorist financing operations that threaten national security at levels we're still trying to understand. The President has decided to create a new joint task force to address these threats." Reynolds paused, watching my reaction carefully. "He wants you to lead it." The Oval Office was smaller than I had imagined, but the weight of history in that room was overwhelming. President William Harrison sat behind the resolute desk, flanked by the Secretary of Defense and the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. I had been in high-security briefings before, but nothing had prepared me for this moment. "Commander Mitchell," the President said, rising to shake my hand, "Admiral Reynolds tells me you've done exceptional work uncovering this espionage network." "Thank you, Mr. President. My team deserves most of the credit." "That's exactly the kind of leadership we need for what comes next," said Secretary of Defense Patricia Williams. The Steinberg investigation revealed connections to international criminal organizations. that pose direct threats to American interests worldwide. The briefing that followed outlined a security landscape that was more complex and dangerous than anything I had previously understood. The spy network we had uncovered was just one tentacle of a massive criminal enterprise that connected corrupt military officials, international arms dealers, terrorist financing networks, and cybercriminal organizations across 6 continents. Traditional approaches to these problems have failed, explained General Marcus Thompson, chairman of the Joint Chiefs. Each agency focuses on their piece of the puzzle. FBI handles domestic crimes, CIA manages foreign intelligence, military handles operational threats. But these networks operate across all those boundaries simultaneously. The president leaned forward, his expression serious. We're creating a new joint task force with unprecedented authority to operate across agency lines and international borders. This task force will report directly to the National Security Council and will have access to resources from every relevant government agency. Secretary Williams opened a folder marked with classifications I had never seen before. The position we're offering you is unique in the American military structure. You would hold the rank of Rear Admiral, lower half, with authority equivalent to a 3-star general when operating under task force orders. The promotion they were describing would make me one of the youngest admirals in Navy history. More importantly, it would give me command authority over resources and personnel from multiple branches of government, something that typically required decades of political maneuvering and traditional career progression. The appointment comes with certain complications, the president continued. For operational security reasons, your promotion and your role in this task force must remain classified at the highest levels. Even most military personnel won't know about your new rank or responsibilities. I understood immediately. I would be an admiral in name and authority, but invisible to the traditional military hierarchy. My family, still focused on conventional markers of success, would never know what I had achieved. Mr. President, I'm honored by your confidence, but I have to ask, why me? There are officers with more experience in joint operations and interagency coordination. General Thompson answered, because you've proven that you can achieve impossible results by thinking beyond conventional approaches. The Steinberg investigation succeeded because you combined operational experience with analytical capabilities in ways that no one else considered. More importantly, added Secretary Williams, you've demonstrated the ability to operate independently under extreme pressure while maintaining absolute integrity. The task force will often operate in situations where you'll have to make critical decisions without time for consultation or approval from Washington. The scope of what they were proposing was staggering. The task force would conduct operations across multiple continents, coordinate with foreign intelligence services, and have authority to pursue threats wherever they led, even if that meant operating in gray areas of international law. The promotion ceremony will be conducted here, in this office, with only the people present in this room, the president explained. Your new rank will be recorded in classified personnel files, but your official record will continue to show your current rank to maintain operational security. Admiral Reynolds, who had remained silent throughout most of the briefing, finally spoke. Sarah, there's one more thing you should know. This position comes with a direct line to the President's daily intelligence briefing. You'll be providing analysis and recommendations that will influence foreign policy decisions at the highest levels. The weight of responsibility was almost overwhelming. I thought about David, about our engagement, about the wedding we were planning. How could I explain that I was about to become one of the most powerful intelligence officers in the American government while maintaining the cover that I was just another Navy commander? I accept, I said, knowing that there was really no other choice I could make in good conscience. The promotion ceremony was unlike anything in military tradition. President Harrison administered the oath personally, while Admiral Reynolds pinned the stars on my uniform collar. There were no photographers, no fanfare, no family members beaming with pride from the audience. Just 5 people in the Oval Office, making history in absolute secrecy. Congratulations, Admiral Mitchell, the president said. Your country is counting on you. The next 6 months were the most challenging and rewarding of my military career. The Joint Task Force, officially designated as the Special Activities Coordination Center, assembled a team of specialists from across the intelligence community. We operated from a secured facility in Northern Virginia that didn't appear on any official government directories. Our first major operation targeted the financial networks that had been exposed during the Steinberg investigation. Working with international partners, we traced money flows from Eastern European arms dealers through Middle Eastern banks to accounts controlled by terrorist organizations. The operation required coordination with law enforcement agencies in 12 countries and resulted in the seizure of over $400 million in criminal assets. But the most significant breakthrough came when we discovered that the corruption network extended into the highest levels of military contracting. Defense contractors were paying bribes to military officials in exchange for classified information about competing bids, while those same officials were selling sensitive technical specifications to foreign governments. The investigation led us to a shocking discovery. My own brother Michael was involved in the conspiracy. The evidence was undeniable. As a lieutenant colonel with oversight responsibilities for major weapons systems procurement, Michael had been accepting payments from defense contractors in exchange for advance information about contract specifications. He had also provided classified technical data about advanced weapons systems to intermediaries who sold that information to foreign intelligence services. The personal betrayal was devastating, but the professional implications were even more serious. Michael's position gave him access to some of the military's most sensitive technological secrets. If he had been compromised, the damage to national security could be catastrophic. I spent 3 sleepless nights reviewing the evidence, hoping to find some alternative explanation for the financial transactions and communication intercepts that implicated my brother. But the pattern was clear and unambiguous. Michael had been betraying his country for at least 2 years. The cruelty of it still took my breath away. My father had turned my wedding into a loyalty test, forcing family members to choose between supporting me and maintaining their relationship with him. Given his position and influence within the extended family, the choice was inevitable. "I'm sorry, Sarah," my mother had continued. "I wanted to come, but you know how he gets when he's made up his mind." I understood the dynamics that had shaped my mother's entire adult life. Patricia Mitchell had learned long ago that open defiance of her husband's decisions led to consequences that affected the entire household. She had chosen the path of least resistance, even when it meant abandoning her daughter on one of the most important days of her life. Now, as I looked at myself in the mirror, I felt the weight of that abandonment. The woman staring back at me wore the dress uniform of a Navy commander, though the stars hidden in my classified personnel file told a different story. My ribbons and decorations spoke of service and sacrifice, but they couldn't fill the empty pews where my family should have been sitting. David appeared in the doorway, resplendent in his own dress uniform, his pilot's wings gleaming above rows of ribbons that documented his own distinguished service. "You look beautiful," he said, though I could see the concern in his eyes. He knew how much my family's absence was hurting me, even if he couldn't understand the full complexity of the situation. "Thank you," I replied, managing a smile that felt more genuine than I had expected. "Are you ready for this?" "I've been ready since the day I met you," he said, taking my hands. "Sarah, I need you to know something. Your family's decision doesn't diminish what we're doing here today. If anything, it proves that you've built a life based on your own values and principles, not theirs." His words carried more truth than he realized. The past decade of my life had been spent building something that my family couldn't understand or appreciate. A career dedicated to protecting the country they claimed to love, achieved through methods they had never bothered to understand. A soft knock on the door interrupted our moment. "Excuse me, Admiral," came a familiar voice. David's eyes widened as Commander Patricia Wong entered the room, followed by Admiral Catherine Reynolds. Both women were in full dress uniforms, their appearance transforming the simple preparation room into something that felt distinctly official. "Commander Wong, Admiral Reynolds," I said, automatically shifting into professional mode despite the wedding setting. "I wasn't expecting." "We wouldn't miss this day," Admiral Reynolds said warmly. "When we learned that your family wouldn't be attending, we decided that your Navy family should be here to support you." David looked confused but remained silent, understanding that he was witnessing something significant, even if he couldn't fully comprehend its meaning. "There's something else," Commander Wong said, producing an official-looking document from her uniform jacket. We have a wedding gift for you, though it's one that must remain confidential." She handed me the document, and I nearly dropped it when I saw the official seal and signature. It was a presidential commendation, signed by President Harrison himself, recognizing my role in dismantling the espionage network that had threatened national security. The language was carefully crafted to avoid revealing classified details, but the significance was unmistakable. "The president wanted you to know that your service hasn't gone unnoticed," Admiral Reynolds explained, "even if that recognition must remain private for now." David watched this exchange with growing amazement, clearly beginning to understand that his bride-to-be was more than the Navy commander she appeared to be. But he maintained the disciplined silence that his own military training had taught him, understanding that some revelations would come in their own time. The chapel began filling with guests as the ceremony approached. David's family had arrived earlier, and I had been touched by their genuine warmth and acceptance. His parents, both Navy veterans themselves, had welcomed me without reservation, treating me like the daughter they had never had. The guest list was unusual for a military wedding. Along with David's family and our mutual friends from various duty stations, the pews contained a collection of individuals whose presence told the story of my unconventional career. There were intelligence officers from multiple agencies, fellow special operations veterans, and several people whose exact roles in government were deliberately ambiguous. Most significantly, there were representatives from foreign intelligence services who had worked with me on various joint operations. The Israeli Mossad had sent their liaison officer from the embassy. A senior analyst from British MI6 had flown in specifically for the ceremony. Even the Germans had sent someone from their Federal Intelligence Service. These weren't typical wedding guests, but they represented the professional family I had built during years of service that my blood relatives had dismissed as unimportant. 30 minutes before the ceremony, Admiral Reynolds pulled me aside for a private conversation. "Sarah, there's something you should know. We've received intelligence that suggests your father and certain members of your extended family may be under surveillance by foreign intelligence services." The news hit me like a physical blow. Surveillance? Why? Michael's arrest exposed connections that go deeper than we initially realized. It appears that foreign intelligence services have been cultivating relationships with your family members, hoping to gain access to classified information through social and professional connections. The implications were staggering. My family's rejection of me might have inadvertently protected them from becoming targets of foreign intelligence operations. Their distance from my classified work had kept them safe from dangers they never knew existed. Are they in immediate danger? No, but we're monitoring the situation. The surveillance appears to be intelligence gathering rather than operational preparation. Still, it's something you should be aware of. As I processed this information, I realized that my family's absence from the wedding might actually be a blessing in disguise. The gathering of intelligence professionals and international representatives in the chapel would certainly be noted by anyone conducting surveillance. My relatives' absence would help maintain their distance from my classified world. The irony was almost overwhelming. My father had cut me off to protect the family's reputation, not knowing that his decision might actually be protecting their physical safety. The ceremony was scheduled to begin in 15 minutes when the chapel's side door opened and a figure in a Navy dress uniform entered quietly. I recognized him immediately. Chaplain Robert Hayes, a Navy captain who served as senior chaplain for Naval Special Warfare Command. Chaplain Hayes was a legend in special operations circles, having served multiple combat deployments and earned decorations for valor under fire. More importantly for this moment, he was one of the few people outside the intelligence community who knew about my classified promotions and assignments. He approached Admiral Reynolds, and they spoke quietly for several moments before he came to where David and I were standing. "Commander Mitchell," he said formally, then smiled warmly. "Sarah, it would be my honor to officiate at your wedding if you'll have me." The offer was unexpected but deeply meaningful. Chaplain Hayes represented the best of military service: courage, integrity, and dedication to something larger than oneself. Having him perform the ceremony would be a recognition of the values that had guided my own service, even when that service had gone unrecognized by my family. "We would be honored, Chaplain," I replied. As guests took their seats and the ceremony approached, I felt a sense of completion that had nothing to do with family approval or conventional expectations. The chapel was filled with people who understood the sacrifices required by service, who appreciated the complexity of dedication to country and duty. David took his position at the altar, his smile bright enough to illuminate the entire chapel. Admiral Reynolds and Commander Wong took seats in the front row, representing the Navy family that had supported and guided my career. The international representatives sat quietly in the back, their presence a testament to the global reach of the work I had done in shadows and secrecy. The organ began playing, and I started my walk down the aisle toward a future that my family couldn't understand but that felt absolutely right for the woman I had become. But the most dramatic moment of the day was still to come, a moment that would forever change how my family understood the choices I had made and the life I had built while they weren't watching. The ceremony began with the traditional processional, but as I walked down the aisle toward David, I noticed something that made my heart skip a beat. In the back pew, partially hidden by shadows, sat my mother. She caught my eye and offered a small, apologetic smile, mouthing the words, "I couldn't stay away." Her presence meant everything to me, even though I knew she would face my father's wrath for defying his orders. Patricia Mitchell had spent 30 years avoiding confrontation, but something about this moment had finally pushed her beyond her comfort zone. Beside her sat my grandmother, Eleanor Mitchell, the family matriarch who had buried 2 husbands and raised 6 children through wars and economic hardships. At 87, she had apparently decided that family loyalty meant more than her son's wounded pride. David noticed my reaction and followed my gaze, his smile broadening as he realized that at least some of my family had found the courage to attend. Chaplain Hayes took his position at the altar, his distinguished bearing commanding immediate attention from everyone in the chapel. What the guests didn't know was that Captain Hayes was about to make history in ways that extended far beyond a simple wedding ceremony. "Dearly beloved," he began, his voice carrying the authority that came from years of leading men and women through some of the most challenging circumstances imaginable. "We are gathered here today to witness the union of 2 people who have dedicated their lives to serving something greater than themselves." The ceremony proceeded traditionally through the opening prayers and biblical readings. David and I exchanged the vows we had written ourselves, promising to support each other through the uncertainties and challenges that came with military life. But as Chaplain Hayes prepared to pronounce us husband and wife, he paused and looked directly at me with an expression that seemed to carry enormous significance. "Before we conclude this ceremony," he said, his voice taking on a formal tone that caused several guests to sit up straighter, "there is one final matter that must be addressed." He turned to face the congregation, his bearing shifting from chaplain to senior military officer. "Ladies and gentlemen, it is my privilege to inform you that this ceremony has been attended by distinguished representatives from allied nations, senior officials from multiple government agencies, and military personnel whose service to our nation has been exemplary." The guests looked around curiously, many of them beginning to sense that something significant was about to happen. "However," Chaplain Hayes continued, "there is one person present today whose service and achievements have not been properly recognized, due to the classified nature of her work." My heart began racing as I realized what was about to happen. This wasn't part of the planned ceremony. Somehow, someone had decided that this moment was appropriate for a revelation that would change everything. "It is therefore my honor," Chaplain Hayes said, his voice rising to fill every corner of the chapel, "to ask everyone present to please stand for Admiral Sarah Mitchell Hayes." The silence that followed was absolute. For a moment, nobody moved, as if the entire congregation was trying to process what they had just heard. Then Admiral Reynolds stood first, followed immediately by Commander Wong. The international representatives rose next, understanding the significance, even if they didn't know all the details. David's family stood, though they looked confused by the sudden formality. But it was the reaction from the back of the chapel that mattered most. My mother's hand flew to her mouth as the implications hit her. My grandmother struggled to her feet, her eyes wide with shock and something that looked like fierce pride. Chaplain Hayes wasn't finished. "Admiral Mitchell has served our nation with distinction in operations that must remain classified, but whose importance to national security cannot be overstated. She has commanded joint task forces, dismantled international criminal networks, and personally prevented threats that could have cost American lives." The words hung in the air like smoke from a ceremonial cannon. David stood beside me, his expression shifting from confusion to amazement as he began to understand the full scope of what his bride had achieved. Her promotion to Rear Admiral was authorized by the President of the United States in recognition of her exceptional service and leadership in some of the most challenging circumstances our military has faced in recent decades. At that moment, the chapel doors opened and my father walked in. Colonel James Mitchell stood in the doorway, still wearing his dress uniform from whatever Pentagon meeting he had presumably just left. His face was a mask of shock and confusion as he tried to process what he was hearing. He had arrived just in time to learn that his, quote, disappointing daughter was actually outranked him by 2 full grades. Chaplain Hayes continued speaking, but I could see my father struggling with the mathematics of military hierarchy. A rear admiral held the equivalent rank of a major general, far above his colonel's eagles. In the rigid structure of military protocol, I was now his superior officer. Admiral Mitchell's classified assignments have taken her to every corner of the globe, where she has worked with our most important allies and confronted our most dangerous enemies. Her analytical capabilities and operational expertise have been personally recognized by the President, the Secretary of Defense, and our most senior military leaders. My father took a hesitant step into the chapel, his eyes fixed on me with an expression I had never seen before. For the first time in my life, I saw something in his face that might have been respect. The nature of Admiral Mitchell's work requires that her achievements remain largely invisible to the public and even to her family. But today, in this sacred place, surrounded by those who understand the true cost of service, we can acknowledge what she has accomplished. David reached for my hand, squeezing it gently as he whispered, "Admiral? My God, Sarah, why didn't you tell me?" "I couldn't," I whispered back. "It's all classified." Chaplain Hayes raised his voice for his final pronouncement. "Ladies and gentlemen, it is my honor to present Admiral and Mrs. Sarah Mitchell Hayes, 2 people whose dedication to duty and to each other represents the very best of military service." The applause was thunderous, echoing off the chapel walls like artillery fire, but all I could focus on was my father's face as he slowly walked down the aisle toward me. When he reached the front of the chapel, he stopped and came to attention, rendering a perfect military salute to his daughter, the Admiral. "Ma'am," he said formally, his voice cracking slightly, "permission to congratulate my daughter on her wedding day." I returned his salute, maintaining the military courtesy that his gesture demanded. "Permission granted, Colonel." He relaxed his posture and stepped forward, his eyes filled with emotions I had never seen before: pride, regret, and something that might have been awe. "Sarah," he said quietly, "I owe you an apology. I never understood. Admiral?" "Yes, Dad, Admiral." He looked around the chapel, taking in the international representatives, the senior military officials, and the obvious significance of the gathering. "Michael?" he asked, the question heavy with implications. "Is being held accountable for his actions," I replied simply, "as he should be." My father nodded slowly, understanding beginning to dawn in his eyes. His son, the one he had pinned all his hopes on, had betrayed everything the Mitchell family claimed to stand for. His daughter, the one he had dismissed as a failure, had risen to heights he had never imagined possible. "Can you forgive an old soldier for not seeing what was right in front of him?" he asked. Before I could answer, David stepped forward and extended his hand to my father. "Colonel Mitchell, I'm David Hayes. It's an honor to meet you, sir." My father shook David's hand, his expression softening as he looked at the man who had chosen to love his remarkable daughter. "The honor is mine, Captain Hayes. And David, thank you for seeing what I was too blind to recognize." The reception that followed was unlike any military celebration I had ever attended. Foreign intelligence officers mingled with Navy families, sharing stories that skirted the edges of classification while celebrating achievements that could never be fully acknowledged in public. My mother approached me during the dancing, tears streaming down her face. "I should have been here from the beginning," she said. "I should have supported you when your father couldn't see past his own expectations." "You're here now," I replied, embracing her tightly. "That's what matters." My grandmother, despite her advanced age, insisted on a dance with her newly revealed Admiral granddaughter. "I always knew you were special," she whispered as we swayed to the music. "I just never imagined how special." As the evening progressed, I found myself surrounded by the two families that had shaped my life, the one I was born into and the one I had chosen through service. David moved easily between both groups, charming my relatives while engaging seriously with the intelligence professionals who had become my closest colleagues. Late in the evening, Admiral Reynolds pulled me aside for a final conversation. "Sarah, there's one more thing you should know. The President has asked me to extend an invitation for you and David to visit the White House next month. He wants to personally thank you for your service, in a setting where that thanks can be properly expressed." The invitation was unprecedented for someone of my official rank, but entirely appropriate for someone with my actual responsibilities and achievements. "Will my family be invited?" "If you'd like them to be," Reynolds replied with a smile. "I think your father might benefit from understanding just how much his daughter's work has mattered to our nation's security." As the reception wound down and David and I prepared to leave for our honeymoon, I reflected on the journey that had brought me to this moment. The path had been difficult, marked by family rejection and professional challenges that had tested every aspect of my character. But standing in that chapel, surrounded by people who understood the true meaning of service, I realized that I had built something extraordinary. Not just a career, but a life dedicated to protecting the values and freedoms that made moments like this possible. My father approached one final time as David and I prepared to leave. "Admiral," he said, using my rank with obvious pride, "I know I have a lot to make up for, but I want you to know that your mother and I would be honored to host a reception for you and David when you return from your honeymoon, something where the whole family can properly celebrate what you've achieved." I looked at this man who had shaped so much of my early life through his expectations and disappointments, and realized that he was offering something more valuable than an apology. He was offering a new beginning. "I'd like that, Dad," I replied. "I'd like that very much." As David and I drove away from the chapel, my new husband reached over and took my hand. "So, Admiral Hayes," he said with a grin, "what other secrets are you hiding from your husband?" I laughed, feeling lighter than I had in years. "Well, there is that matter of the Presidential Medal of Freedom ceremony next month." David's eyes widened. Then he began laughing too. "I married way above my pay grade, didn't I?" "Captain Hayes," I said, squeezing his hand, "you have no idea." But as we drove toward our future together, I knew that the most important victory wasn't the recognition or the rank, or even my family's newfound respect. It was the realization that I had stayed true to myself and my principles, even when doing so had seemed to cost me everything that mattered. The woman who had been dismissed as a disappointment had become Admiral Sarah Mitchell Hayes, and that transformation had been worth every sacrifice along the way. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.